Hi, everyone. Before I give my little spiel, I just wanted to say I know some of you are going upstairs to portfolio reviews after this. This will end at 11:30, and I know that starts at 12, so don't worry, you will get there on time. So don't just rush out early. And make sure you have your portfolio ready just in case Wi-Fi is finicky and things like that. All right, cool? Awesome. All right, well, good morning, everyone. I'm Bella. I'm the Senior Membership Manager here at the One Club. So excited to have you guys here for episode 2 of Morning Buzz. I see a lot of familiar faces here today from yesterday, so thank you for coming back. And for anyone who is new, we are the One Club, the world's foremost nonprofit celebrating the global creative community. And as a membership organization, we run events like this all year round, all over the globe to uplift, upskill, support, and celebrate the talent of our community. And let me tell you, we are in the thick of it right now. We celebrated the 2026 Young Ones Awards last night. Congratulations to our winners. Give it up for our winners. Who was that, Young Ones? Raise your hands. Awesome. How tired are you? Yeah? All right. And then Wednesday, I'll be seeing some of you for maybe the biggest night of design, the ADC Awards. Yes. And then on Friday, of course, we have the one, the only, the One Show. Give it up for ADC and One Show. All right. But before that, let's get into today's episode. We have an absolute all-star roster. So first up, we'll have Jake Neske, who's the co-founder and managing partner at Hustle and AKA, and Nico Palillo, Director of Development at the design agency Sturdy. And they'll be discussing designing for surfaces, which is exploring how the surface shapes the craft and why artists are the most honest brief you'll ever get. And then joining us will be writer, producer, and creative strategist Yasmin Ekter, who will chat about how the storytelling skills used in advertising can evolve into creating original IP. And finally, we'll be joined by a few folks from Team One, Lindsay Calabrese, Director of Partnerships and Culture, Cara, Lohman, Strategy Director, and Raj Ramamurthy, the Creative Director of Team One. And they'll be diving into the challenges of creating and evolving in a swipe speed culture. So also, if any questions come up, hold on to them because there may be time for a brief Q&A after. So, all right, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome our first guests. Jake Neske, the co-founder and managing partner of Hustle and AKA. He's a legendary connector who scaled Media Monks' US expansion and has spent decades helping creative companies stand out and grow. Joining him is Nico Palillo, Director of Development at Sturdy. He led creative pipelines for global giants like Apple, Nike, and Formula One. He brings a unique perspective shaped by time on set, in the field, and in the boardroom. So without further ado, Jake and Nico. All yours.
Morning, how's everyone? It sounded like creative weed when you were chanting back before.
Weed. Let's see if this works.
You got a pointer.
There we go.
Cool. Well, nice to meet everyone. I think just to start off, I am a lowly sales hack, so I'm good for ordering drinks. But Nico has a really diverse background, and I think it really colors how he got to Sturdy. So, could you give us the quick, how did you go from directing to stages? 2 minutes, because we got 15.
Yeah, I'll do it in 60 seconds. I started out on the agency side, which I think really kind of trained me for a bit of the world outside of agency. So I was at McCann, I was at Donor, I was at Leo Burnett back in the day in Detroit, and that kind of brought me into the world of production and really fell in love with that process and the processes around it. And then I started simultaneously, I was double dipping, which I don't recommend for anybody's health in their early 20s. I was going to school, I was working at agencies kind of as a creative intern, as a design intern, all the things, just kind of trying to rise the ranks. And then I started crewing as well. So I was PAing on a lot of big automotive jobs in Detroit about 10 years ago. And then that led me to kind of having this multifaceted portfolio, which led to directing for Pulse Films for the last few years and shooting a lot of big campaigns with them. And then that led to an opportunity with Sturdy, which kind of combined everything of the craft of creative into production, and then looking at how we take that into the physical space with artists and now with brands.
So, like I've worked with a lot of artists through my years, and people get very narrowly focused in what they do. So if you're a director, oftentimes, like if you do comedy, that's all you ever get to do. How have you brought all of your skill sets to kind of manipulate different surfaces now with Sturdy?
I think there's a bit of, and I'm sure many of you in the room can relate to this, I think there's becoming, thankfully, a bit of a paradigm shift of what it means to be a creative or a producer or a writer or whatever. I think there was, when I started out, a lot of stigma of, hey man, if you're just going to direct, just direct. If you're just going to be a producer, just be a producer. And I was like, dude, I love all this. I love all of this. It's so fun. And I think the best way that we kind of put it now, as somebody who has risen the ranks as a director, as a producer, as just a general kind of creative incubator of interesting ideas and interesting, brands and clients, is really kind of how it's all about the surface. So the surface changes. That can be a physical surface, a digital surface, a social surface, and the discipline doesn't. I think it's always multidisciplinary of nature, and that's kind of been not only the worldview of Sturdy, but I think a bit of my personal worldview as a director, as a creative in general.
I'll just go. Where am I? We'll come back to this. So I think almost everyone is familiar with Bad Bunny. It's kind of a thing, right? As some of you may know, he did a residency in Puerto Rico that got a little bit of attention. Sturdy is very much behind that. So what do the company was born out of sort of stagecraft, but how does that inform how it works in general?
Yeah, I think I'll try not to rant too much about this because it's actually very interesting. But the Sturdy was built from a few of our partners, one being Adrian Martinez, who is Bunny's creative director in the live space. So when the offer came into me and my business partner there, Reka Heineck, we were like, oh, this is interesting. They want to build a brand studio, out of the company doing, I think, in our humble opinion, some of the more interesting live work in the world. Everything from Bad Bunny's global tours to the residency in Puerto Rico was our brainchild, to Raul Alejandro, Bad Omens, the Eagles at the Sphere. And the idea was, how do we take those disciplines, to my earlier point, those kind of these creative polymaths, and take them into the brand space? So that's really been how the studio has become an incubator for beautiful creative ideas, from live to everything now on the brand side, which we'll get into in a minute. But again, the idea is that it's built for surfaces where the audience actually cares about showing up. And I think we can all relate that is sometimes a concert, sometimes building a giant mountain for Bad Bunny in a stadium in Puerto Rico, to a really, really small show for, we're doing stuff, not small per se, but doing stuff right now for the Kid Leroy, to doing a really beautiful conference for Rocket Mortgage, where the reference is, we love Bad Bunny and we love WWE. So what can we do? And we're like, neither of those, but we'll do our best to split the difference. And I think that's where the studio and my creative ethos and the team's creative ethos has really kind of come full circle as these polymaths that are able to just flex and lead with creative at all touch points, kind of agnostic of the size of the project.
Awesome. So, it's not a commercial, it's not a tour, it's not an activation, but how, for you, has the compression of telling a short branded piece informed how you bring that to live acts?
Yeah, I think it's quite rare that I'm in a room with so many people who probably like watching commercials, or maybe don't. But I know I do. I know I enjoy the craft of coming from automotive so heavily and just kind of the general live action space. You only have so much time in 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 6 seconds. And I think the idea was that, you really have to understand how not only do you grab people's attention, but again, how do we pull out of that kind of what's the purpose of that surface, and how do we really make sure that we understand that? So we really look at it, myself and Reka running the brand studio, we really look at, again, if we were to think about this as like an ad, if we were to think about it as a piece of cinema, what is the thing that people are going to leave with that? And for us, it's really boiled down to, as I think we'll get into, two things. We don't really pick one thing. We try to not really go about it with a specific discipline in mind, and then we try to think about it again in a way that's, again, as multifaceted as possible, where the discipline is undetermined until we start getting into the creative process and we understand what that build is going to look like. And we pretty much pitch wildly off brief most of the time, because we're like, no, this is what's going to matter. So here's us going after kind of what you want, but also what we think is going to be the best medium for you and your customers or the audience. And then we usually back that into the strategy of what we think they actually need. So it kind of retrofits it, but I think, again, as somebody who shot a lot of these things that you guys probably just like skip over on Instagram, you're like, who's going to drive a Cadillac right now? Is, again, it just really teaches you about that compression and intent and using every single second wisely, and that informs how we go about the pitch and everything we do in the live space.
We can kind of see the constraints of what you're dealing with from a story here. Where do you think the frame starts for an experience? For a concert, does it start in the parking lot? Does it start at a live show, building up to it? Like, how do you think about framing how a user, a customer is kind of filtering into a live event?
I think for us, I guess for me specifically, it starts in two places. For instance, and we'll get to Bad Omens in a minute, because that was the one I was a bit more kind of a part of. I think it starts with how it's socialized out of the gates. I think the Bad Bunny thing, as I'm sure people saw, that was a big deal before the shows even happened. That was a big deal a year before the shows even happened, because it was just so unorthodox of somebody doing a residency for that long in their hometown. So I think it starts for us with how do we put it out there and how do we make it sticky? How do we really, really make sure that if it's a brand activation or a live show, what's the reason for that piece of art to exist, and really give it an interesting angle. Bad Bunny's angle was obviously, this residency in Puerto Rico, the first 9 or 10 shows, I forget how many, only reserved for Puerto Rican residents. That's super interesting. That right there, you're like, whoa, this is special. And I think on the brand side, it's kind of the same thing. If we look at like the Rocket Mortgage work, for instance, it's how are they showing up? How are they doing something different for their people? I think people genuinely want to buy and be associated with businesses that are also good to their staff. And that was our angle of how do we make sure that the staff and everybody who's going to this, because that was for 15,000 of their employees, how do we make sure that that's socialized as such as that was special for their people? Their journey was special there. That means my journey as a customer most likely will be special as well. It's kind of cheesy. It's a little hippy-dippy, but I think it's like you need to give people a reason to want to exist in those spaces. And I think just the general analog nature of belonging, like you should also feel in a piece of advertising, in motion, is really kind of the crux of the creative process for us.
For anyone who's ever done a creative brief, the media often dictates what you're going to put out there. I think that's the super exciting part of experience now, is that it's still, it's a bit about real estate. Like, obviously Coachella is a big launching pad, the Super Bowl, etc. But those are really crowded environments. It's not like television where you're kind of fed one thing after another. How do you design for the attention in that moment so that, when there's 15 other booths, people are spending time at yours?
Again, I think we're a little spoiled coming from, having a group of creatives and a lot of like ex-architects that we've kind of trained to bring into the brand space. I think to be honest with you, with everybody here, they think about it a little differently because we know what stands out in the live space. So I think all of our brand work is built like a live performance. That's just the best way to put it. It's like it's built with the lighting, with the screens, with everything from how you're entering, how you're leaving, everything you see, everything you hear inside is so meticulously designed, and there's always kind of a special entry point. The F1 work is a great example of that, just how it was elevated. We knew the sight lines. We know the best way to bring people into that and give them an experience where they don't want to leave.
Makes sense. Look at this baby.
That was fun. I know we only have a few minutes left, but I can touch on just a few of these really quickly, maybe,
Yeah.
and then we can get to kind of the proof point of all of it. But as you guys all know, we've already talked about this one, but I think what this proved is that, like, people will go to things and people will still spend money for these analog experiences. That's huge. People will fly to Puerto Rico. I'm sure many of you, whether you went or not, probably know people that went, and that's quite a journey to still leave, not leave the country per se, right, but still leave the continental US, you know, the mainland, and go down to a place like this to enjoy something, and having all of them sold out is a great example that people will go to these things if they believe in it. This is another great example, I think, to the second touch point of what it means to bring people into an event. This was a great example of, like, a few nights into the tour, it was socialized so effectively, and we also created a suite of films for the band in the live action space, which informed how the live show came together, and all the interstitials, everything between acts. It was essentially built like a piece of cinema. 3-4 nights into the tour, you saw the internet start talking about it. Reddit was blowing up. Oh my gosh, I saw the music videos, I saw this. Now they're like expanded live. So full service experience kind of brought into the true narrative storytelling of what a very, very, you know, large metal band can do in the live space.
Where did that sort of conversation start with the artists?
They reached out. They saw some work we were doing with some other, you know, notable kind of bands of similar genre, and they said, yeah, they want to make a movie. And I was like, okay, like, that's really hard. That's kind of gnarly. Music's not done, but you know, we went and we shot all over the world. We shot a few music videos. We shot interstitials. We started releasing teasers in other languages, one of them being Slovenian, just to start confusing people and just try to kind of create a bit of this mysticism. And then when you get to the live show, that story started to pay off and started to show how it all kind of came together in a really beautiful space.
I don't know if the audience thinks about it this way, but a concert's effectively a piece of branding for an artist. How do you see the difference between managing a artist client versus a brand client?
I think we, from an account level, and as many of you know, they are very different. But at the end of the day, like, they need something, and we're there to help them. That's just the truth, in my opinion, of I think the service aspect of what we all get to do as creatives, as directors, as producers is really beautiful. I think the service industry is essentially what this is. So I think if you serve with the same goal in mind, that we're always going to, like, crush it for you and do an amazing job and make this as special as possible, my job is to kind of deflect a bit of the stress so that the creatives can just craft as unencumbered as possible. And I think that's why you see the results. You provide a little of that protective barrier, and then they're able to, create the best work in the world, and always funneling that back and kind of augmenting it to make sure that our brands and our artists get what they need.
So for those in the audience who don't know, Rocket is helmed by a gentleman named Jonathan Mildenhall, who was recently named CMO of the Year. Really brilliant marketer, exceedingly demanding. So with that in mind, who's more challenging, Sir Mildenhall or Bad Omens, Bad Bunny?
Artists are always more challenging. I think we all know that. I mean, yeah, I think the biggest marketer of the year, or whatever it is, I think that there's always levers to be pulled, and they kind of understand the creative process sometimes a little bit more. But I think the payoff is just as beautiful on both fronts. And sometimes the trials and tribulations you go through with an artist like a Bad Omens or a Bunny or Rao or Leroy, it's just part of that. I think everything has to always be boiled back to, like, that's just the creative process. It's always messy, and as long as you have a really, really smart team leading it and making sure that you're not, going over budget, I think it's the mess is the opportunity. I think it's the best way to put it.
Questions, comments, concerns?
No, sorry, I was just going to say the mic will be passed around, so I'm
Oh.
glad you got it. There you go.
What's been your biggest challenge with regards to bridging the gap between traditional like branding and advertising and social media world?
Specifically in the experiential space or just as a studio?
As a studio and the transference in general, I would imagine capturing the footage experientially,
Uh-huh.
well, not manipulating, but like translating that to social media.
Yeah, I think that we have done a really, really effective job trying to make sure that, here's the thing, brands are not spending what they used to spend on massive like parties or XP. You know, you used to have some of the big auto brands being like, we're gonna pay 7 figures to, you know, do something around Art Basel. And it's just gonna be a big party and we're gonna, you know, hopefully that gets, it was kind of a lot of like, it was treated as a bit more like, oh, if it gets out into the world, that's great. Now, everybody needs to see the ROI before it happens. So our whole thing when we've been approaching those pieces of business has been we're very, very clear about what is, you know, their return on investment. So we provide, you know, what does it look like in social? You know, for instance, with Rocket Mortgage or actually with Apple, you know, and Formula One, we really built the architecture with our partners at London Alley and Pulse and Vice to show them how it works in the social space. So it's like, yes, you're spending a lot of money on a physical build for maybe only 10,000 people, but here's how it lives in that other space. And I think that with everything we do, social's a non-negotiable. So for us, it's treated as such. It's always in every pitch, every idea, everything has to back out to work really, really effectively in the social ecosystem. Because then it allows them, and I think the Jonathan Mildenhalls of the world, to justify it, to justify the spend. Look at, yes, you're gonna be doing something really cool for a few days, but also it's gonna live on for the next 6 months through a very calculated, you know, social plan.
I also think if you think about the Bad Bunny residency as it made a lot of impact because it was in one place and it forced people to go there, you then saw literally in 1 year's time, Bieber took the exact opposite approach. So for Coachella, they started teasing that out a year before with just super intimate concerts, like pulling in lots of artists to kind of give him extra cred about being the headliner of Coachella, and then they wrapped that all in all of the various Bieber brands for, you know, his wife, his own Skylark brand. So I think we'll see a continuation of sort of like long tail content into experiential because, I mean, we didn't even mention AI yet, but I should ask, you know, I think a lot of the investment that we're seeing in experiential is it's ultimately going to be the last human portion of marketing. You still need people to show up and you need people to make it.
To stay on track, we're going to have just one more question. If anyone has?
Hi, my name is Nicole. First of all, thank you guys so much for this. I was wondering, how do you guarantee that people will show up if you do something like a surprise pop-up without social media?
Oh man, we're dealing with that right now with the big artists, and there are ways to guarantee it. There absolutely are. It's just being super real with you guys. There's services, there's other things that we can do to kind of ensure that people come. There's obviously an influencer component. So there's always, what I'm getting at is there's always a monetary way to ensure that people show up. But again, I think it also depends on how we seed it. You know, how we seed it, depending on what it is. Again, like I brought up with the bad omens of it all, that was their first arena tour. They sold out multiple of those shows, and I would think that a lot of the credit is due to the work that led up to it and how it was kind of posted about organically through the trades, through the band members' Instagrams, through their main accounts. So when it comes to getting people to show up, again, organically, I think it just has to be a really good offering. And that's usually our rule. We will only take stuff on if it's like, this is creatively invigorating and it feels like something that we would want to go to as a team. Then it's much easier to back out a plan to get people to show up. But it's kind of built to spec, as I'm sure you all could imagine. But it's, yeah, if there's good creative and there's a reason for people to show up, much like this, I think the audience tends to come. And I think to Jake's point, to end on this note, like the experiential of it all, what we're doing right now, kind of the analog nature of being in person is kind of the last bastion of the safe creative process. And I think where things are headed, kind of coming back to a bit more of the physical space, And people are really craving that right now. So it's not too hard to get people out these days, which is really special.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Give it up for Jake and Nico. All right, so now we're going to hear from Yasmin Ekter. She's a writer, producer, and creative strategist whose work spans branded storytelling and original content development. She has worked with major media brands like CBS News and Nickelodeon, and she's a proud alum of Droga 5, D5 and 10, and our very own One Creator Lab. So please give it up for Yasmin.
Hello. Thank you for having me. There we go. Okay. Hello. So this morning, I really wanted to talk about my creative pivots spanning from network marketing all the way over to original content. Really questioning how do we take the skills we learned from advertising and campaign work and use them to build bigger creative worlds. Because I think a lot of us are coming into these creative industries. A lot of us are multi-hyphenates, and you may feel like you have to pick one lane, but we're also in a very interesting economy right now, and that provides a lot of different opportunities, like that. So with that, it allows us creatives to expand what creating actually means. So oftentimes you're either in advertising or entertainment, you're either a strategist or a writer, and I think that split is starting to feel outdated, and the lines are blurring, so are the formats. So with that, original worlds are becoming a little bit more valuable. With that, there's this idea of advertising as a training ground for experimentation and pushing mediums such as especially video content forward. So as I've learned, and probably many of you, advertising teaches us how to move people. And when I say move people, I mean that primarily in two ways. So it teaches us how to move people emotionally, but also trains you in like motion content when it comes to image, sound, rhythm, pacing, story. Along with that, every campaign starts with the question, how do we make people care? And how do we make people care quickly? And that question is at the center of so much of motion storytelling, brand storytelling, whether you're in branded film, social first, as well as like vertical microdramas, which we'll get to at some point. So for me, the pivot is really learning how to move from content that captures attention to worlds that build attachment and continue that relationship onward. So really, attention is the first door. Attachment is what makes people stay and come back. Get briefly into my path into this pivot. My own path has been a little bit of a collage, as you can see. I worked in children's media and entertainment marketing over at Nickelodeon production, where I learned a lot about clarity, emotion, timing, and accessibility. And that transferred over to Brand Studio, or CBS News Brand Studio, where I was in branded content, where I was working across various campaigns with everything from docu-style content to social media, streaming, and different kinds of motion storytelling. And then Droga 5, UCLA. With these, it may seem like a collage, but overall, they're all working in concert, and I use these to create a bit of a different creative language that eventually led to creating my own IP, which is now Palpus Productions. So, as we probably heard earlier, advertising is storytelling under pressure. And with pressure, or with that pressure, it's every kind of pressure. It could be time pressure, budget pressure, client pressure, pressure of someone saying, can we make that feel more premium? Can you make it pop? There's always going to be some sort of pressure. Let's go back. But that pressure teaches you useful things. such as who are we talking to in terms of the audience insight. There we go. In terms of the audience insight, why should they care, which is the emotional clarity. What is the fastest way in, the narrative economy. And what does it feel like? What do we want the audience to feel? So that's tone, voice, and curating the visual language. And for motion content specifically, how does it move? What is the pacing, the rhythm, and the sound? What is the overall experience behind the performance? So a great 30-second spot has to do a lot very quickly. It's very compressed. And within that, you have to land an idea and leave some sort of memory behind it. Overall, curate the feeling of what you want the people to leave with. So advertising trains you to make moving images clear, emotional, and memorable before people look away. So, in getting into original content, we go into the intersection between how campaigns are already operating within like a storytelling system. So here we have a campaign and IP may look different on the surface, but structurally they have a lot of common. So in a campaign, you have an audience. In IP, you have fan base. In a campaign, you have a brand truth. In original IP, you have a theme, and so on and so forth. And if the campaign has a repeatable format, that starts to look a lot like a story engine. So within that, so once you start seeing campaigns as story systems, original IP becomes less of a leap and more of an expansion on the potential of these creative worlds that are being built. So you're not starting from scratch. You're taking the same way of thinking and letting it breathe a little longer, decompressing, if you will. So getting into the story of the collision, or the future of the collision, rather. And this matters because the industry itself is changing and colliding in a lot of different ways. Ads, entertainment, creators, and platforms are no longer separate lanes as much as they used to be. So the next wave of IP or advertising activations may not start on the studio lot, and it may not start in a C-suite meeting. It might start as a vertical series, a creator format, a branded short. It runs the gamut. So this really matters, especially now, because of those old paths into storytelling are not the only paths. And I think specifically for creatives, you don't have to wait for permission to start building. And that in itself is encouraging and inspiring. So the future of storytelling is fluid in format, it's audience tested, and built to expand. So to get a bit into my process, when I'm moving in between campaigns, whether it's motion content, original storytelling, my process is really about finding the hidden worlds inside of an idea. So just as with advertising, we start with the human truth. What feeling, tension, desire, or behavior is underneath all of this? Because whether you're selling a product or pitching a show, there has to be something recognizable at the center that the audience can grab onto. We can think of it as the hook. Then I think about the audience relationship. Who is this for, and what do they already recognize in themselves that they are trying to consume outwardly? And what do they secretly feel, but maybe haven't expressed yet? And then I look at the story engine. What keeps the idea moving? What repeats? What creates momentum? What makes someone say, okay, what happens next? And I need to see how this ends. Going forward into the motion language, what is the pacing, the rhythm? What does it sound like? How does it cut? And how do these people perform in these various worlds that we're creating? And going in deeper into the world, who lives there? What are the rules? What are the rituals? What are the laws that we're abiding by within these various creative worlds that we're creating? What is the ecosystem? And how can this idea live beyond the execution? Could it be a series? Is it social? Is it a live event? Is it a community? Is it maybe a tie between all of those different ecosystems? So marketing asks, why should people care? And creating original IP more so asks, why should people come back? So I'm going to start this. This is one of my projects called Godspeed Gia. That's a vertical series. And yeah, I'm gonna talk through it while this plays. Okay, so it's a little low, so you can probably just read it, but I'll talk through. This is my project, Godspeed Gia. So it's a vertical dramedy about someone who has terrible taste in prospects, who keeps accidentally dating criminals until the police recruits her to keep doing it on purpose. It's obviously fiction, I promise. Totally not based on a true story. But the human truth beneath it is really from the zeitgeist. Sometimes the things that we're embarrassed by is actually the things that make us useful at the story's core. For Gia, that thing is her romantic judgment, and she thinks she's a bad picker is a flaw. But in this heightened comedic world that I've curated, that flaw becomes a skill. So, digging into the audience relationship, it's built around a familiar feeling. Is my picker broken? And I think a lot of people understand that, and maybe not everyone has dated a criminal, hopefully. But a lot of people understand the feeling of looking back and questioning their choices. The story engine is simple, it's repeatable. Every date introduces a new suspect, a new crime, another reason for Gia to question what's going on in the world, and another opportunity to explore it. And as we can see, this is a vertical. So the motion language is phone first, it's fast, it's intimate, and built for comedic viewing. And the world is dating apps, bad romance, bumbling cops, suspicious men and women, and non-binary people. And the absurdity of turning heartbreak into detective work. So there's that. And outside of the cultural impact, there's the idea of what brands live in this ecosystem already that I've partnered with. So in this instance, potential could look like Bumble or The League or Tinder or Gen Z millennial media outlets like Vox or Betches. Even more so, I feel like within creating these different worlds and enabling creatives to continue forward, I shot this concept vertically over 2 days with like a lean team of just friends that also work in advertising. And we're part of this experiment to see how much you could build with limited resources. But what does it mean? So I believe that this isn't only useful if you're trying to make a show or make original IP in any format that it takes. You can use the same process for portfolio projects, a student campaign, short films, social series, specs, any ad. But in closing, I think advertising really taught me how to find the insight. Motion content really taught me how to make it felt and how to transfer that feeling onto the audience. And original storytelling taught me how to build a world around it. Thank you. Am I good on time?
Yeah. Hi, okay, so I believe we do have time for just one question. Anyone have any questions? Can we get a mic over here in the red?
With vertical microdramas like you just showed, how is getting that online and getting a fan base different than going to like a traditional studio and getting your work with like Hollywood and other big corporations like that?
What's the difference?
Yeah.
I would say above all else is accessibility. It's like what we did with this microdrama, literally anybody could do it. It's in, I think, cultivating community in a more organic way, and not necessarily through, let's say, like venues like paid media. But within that, I do think that there's a sense of like a greater community that's built that feels a little bit more organic. Through the Hollywood system, it also takes a lot longer. So it's absolutely faster as well.
Awesome. All right, so to keep things moving, I'm so sorry because we have another panel coming up, but give it up for Yasmin. Yes. Yes. If you'd like to reach out to Yasmin, you can find her after the show or reach out to membership@oneclub.org and we'll put you in touch. Great. Yeah, or she'll be in the back. All right, so we are going to wrap up the session with our final speakers. We have a panel from Team 1. So we are going to welcome Lindsay Calabrese, who's an influencer marketing and creative economy executive leading creator for brands like Google, Instagram, and Dove. And she's also helped launch CoverGirl's first influencer chatbot and has been featured in Forbes and Fast Company. And then Lindsay will be joined by Cara Lohman, who's a brand strategy director who balances enduring brand identity with cultural momentum for brands like Lexus, Nike, Hinge, and Etsy. And joining them will be Raj Ramamurthy, who's a creative director, and his storytelling journey began in the movie poster design industry before moving into filmmaking and advertising. And so please welcome Lindsay, Cara, and Raj.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. Super excited to talk to you all and hopefully have what feels more like a conversation about evolving with culture. Creating at the speed of culture is the official title of our talk, but I think something that we've been discussing, we all work together too at Team 1, is that culture has become kind of a buzzword, right? We've all been in meetings where we've heard the words, we need to tap into culture or we need to hijack culture come up. And there is this very real tension for brands, especially legacy brands, to stay true to their North Star, but then also be culturally relevant and keep pace and lead culture. So wanted to just open up the conversation with, what does it actually mean to be a part of culture? What does it actually take?
When I think about how culture has evolved, I think that there's no singular culture that rules them all. I think about how culture is now made up of millions and millions of micro communities. So as marketers, we need to be really thoughtful about understanding who we're trying to reach, what they care about, where do they go online and in the real world for community. And a lot of times they don't necessarily mirror each other. I think we need to really think about the impact that we want to have within these communities, be super intentional about not just who we partner with, but how we partner with them, how we enter the conversation. And there's like a strategy that's kind of gaining momentum. It's called niche stacking. And it's gaining popularity because it doesn't look at culture as a clean, straight map, a path that you can map back to and plan for. It recognizes that culture it moves fast and it can be unpredictable. It can be messy. It can look chaotic, and it can maybe resemble more like a constellation that is super beautiful right from the inside and when you zoom out. And a brand that actually does niche stacking really well is Gucci. So a real life example of what that looks like is partnering with creators within the bird watching community, right? They gain kind of relevance and momentum, and then they layer on top of that gardening creators. And again, they establish themselves, gain credibility, and then they layer on top of that train spotting creators. So these three communities may look like they don't have like a clear media plan on paper, but they do have like a shared curiosity. They're very passionate and very specific. That's kind of how I look at like culture evolving. And then as it evolves, you kind of have to look at measuring it differently, right? Not just like mass reach, but looking at brand love metrics like shares and saves and tagging.
I love that. No, that's so fascinating, the idea of niche stacking. And I think for me in my work as in the strategy world, and my background is in consumer insights and doing, focus groups, primary research. I think something that brands often forget to ask is, brands might be quick to ask, how can I be more tapped into culture? But they might skip over the step of, how am I showing up in culture today and what is my role? I spent 2 years working with Hinge, the dating app company, to help them better understand their role in the future of dating. But before we could even answer that question, we did a lot of research with them to understand how Hinge was influencing dating culture. And to get to the heart of that, we did research with Gen Z and millennial single women here in New York, and we got them talking, not in like a focus group setting, but in at the Arlo Soho, actually, so more of like a lounge space. And we had these vent and dream sessions with them where they shared what their dating experiences were, what their, if dating was a speedboat, what are their dating anchors holding them back, what are what's the boost that's propelling them forward. And it revealed that what they really wanted from Hinge in dating was not just better and more matches, but to empathize with the realities of dating. Like, they're not going on dating apps to find their forever partner. They're just trying to find a date to go on in real life. And so I guess for me, as the strategy world, I'm often thinking about let's get realistic about how you're showing up in culture now before we can talk about having this sort of forefront leading role. But Raj, I'm curious, as a creative director with your background, how does this topic of culture appear for you in your work, and what are you thinking about today?
It's really interesting you bring it up, because yesterday, Lindsay, when we were talking about it, you did say, honestly, culture is all about intention. It starts with intention, and you really need to know the impact you want to make as a brand before you just, jump onto any cultural conversations or trend, because it's not just really jumping onto whatever you find and wanting to be part of everything. I mean, it's also understanding behind every cultural conversation or a trend, there is a deep human behavior. I'm sure you can talk to it too. I think people are not just reacting to the creative. Of course, people love the creative work you put out, but I think it's more so like, what is it that people are latching onto, and what is it that makes them fall in love with some of these things you're creating? Because as a brand, you can be part of culture, but also I think you really need to understand and have a point of view and say when it's your time and when you can genuinely contribute to what's happening in culture, it's worth contributing. But also, like, people are smart enough to know when you capitalize on something that's happening versus when you're genuinely participating in something, right? So I think there is a line between you just wanting to be part of it, but also like really seeing.
I mean, when I think about tapping into culture and hijacking it, it's kind of, what's the longevity with that, right? Especially you can get into wormhole and about cultural appropriation and stuff like that. But like, I really do obsess about who you're trying to reach, why, where do they go online in the real world community? Find these communities, find the culture drivers, the community builders, the community architects, the creators within these communities, and like, have a conversation. What are their hopes and dreams? What do they want to actualize for their community? Build with them, lay footprints, because that's actually how you're going to safeguard your brand for the future.
I really want to talk about this idea of control with you both, because when it comes to being culturally relevant and tapping into communities from the brand perspective, there's a moment in the process where your client or the marketers might have to turn control over to the creators. And that's a very scary thing, honestly, for a lot of brands. So yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on control and how best to navigate that, or any learnings or experiences you've had.
So I partnered with Axe for a year-long rebranding campaign. In their words, not mine, they were tired of being looked at as a douche brand and wanted to be looked at as the brand that empowered and inspired and gave men confidence. And so we actually partnered them with 30 men across 5 different verticals, like sports, comedy, music, gaming, and like food or something like that. And it was a year-long partnership, but the partnership kicked off on March 1st, and all 30 guys were given the same brief. And the brief only had two things. It said, in 60 seconds or less, show and tell us how styling your hair every day gives you the confidence that lasts throughout the day. And then two, just tie it back to your passion point. And we let them wild. And I mean, Adweek called it a masterclass in influence marketing, and they cited because we just let them go wild. And we saw, fans, and people commenting across all of the different videos, and they're just like, I love seeing the different interpretation from someone from comedy to sports and music. I love to see how they're kind of tying it all together. And we accomplished the rebranding, I would say, we didn't need a whole year because we turned it over to people who, show and told what they were doing.
Did you find that you needed to convince the clients' acts to, were they comfortable with that process, or did it require some selling in?
I mean, again, as marketers and stewardships of brands, it's our job to educate them and to rein them in. We delivered them a list of maybe 60 men, and we told them to go through, approve them. And they initially approved 3 guys. And my team was like,
Classic.
I promise you. They're like, I promise you all 30 of them are on this list. Trust us. So I got on a call and I said, okay, we're going to have, this call's an hour. We're going to take less than a minute, and I'm going to go through every single one of these creators and tell you why they're a great fit. And I want you to say approved or not approved. And at the end of it, they approved all but 3. And one was a teen. He was, transgender and going through transition at the time. And we're like, I promise you. He had never had a brand partnership before. We're like, I promise you, he's the right fit. And he performed so well that they actually gave us more money to do another campaign just with him and John Legend. So you have to there are battles that are worth picking and fighting for.
That's such an interesting process, and we were talking about this earlier. There is the traditional process of advertising that is still relevant, where you're building the TV campaign and then you're building the accompanying print and all those materials. But then there's also the process of working with creators and giving them a lot of control. I'm just curious, for you, Raj, how do you feel about this process? Do you look forward to working with creators in that process? And yeah, I'm curious what it's been like for you.
Absolutely. Going back to your Instagram experience, I also had a decent amount of time working with Instagram. And to be honest, if you want to work with creators, brands and their teams have to loosen their grip over creative control a little bit, because you can't just get somebody who's good at doing something and tell them how to do it, because that doesn't really make any sense, right? So I worked on a campaign. This was Instagram's first ever brand campaign called We Make Today. And this was about a few years ago, and the whole idea is all built around how the platform performs and functions, right? It's there are people making things every single day, and that was the whole point of We Make Today. And to prove the concept, what we decided to do was bring an idea to life every single day and put it out in the world the same day, right? So to prove it, we would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, start looking for what's actually trending on Instagram. And we would have topics, right? It could be about euphoria, it could be about comedy, it could be about world peace, it could be about, similar to what you were talking about, you would always pick a topic and you start digging through what's trending at that point in time on that day. And we would make cut, edit, source, color, mix, get it approved by the legal, finish graphics, and put it out.
Legal.
And legal, because you can't do anything without legal. Yeah, right? And you would put it back on Instagram, the platform, every single day by 4 o'clock, because you wanted just enough time for everybody to see it on the platform as well. What was interesting about that experience was, when we talk about culture really moving at the speed of swipe, I think it really is true. And the biggest thing becomes, it's not just about creative and creators, it's also is the brand willing to work as fast as creators and the platform itself, right? Because these brands are there are layers and layers and layers of people who has to approve anything before it goes out in the world. So creator partnership also heavily relies on the people you work with, and you really have to trust instincts, because sometimes for responsiveness, like you really need to have that trust. The trust between the agency and creators and the clients all have to go hand in hand together to say, yes, we can make this happen.
How did you, I think this is probably, we have like a minute left or two before questions, but how did you stay sane in that process? Because just hearing you talk about it, I'm stressed. I'm burnt out just from hearing you talk about it. So be honest, were you burnt out?
Yeah,
or how do you, what do you have to avoid
I
that?
want all of these people to be inspired and to want to do this, so I'm not going to lie, but at the same time, it seems easy sometimes, but I think there's a lot of work and passion that goes into making these things. You have to really say, I'm passionate enough to do this. Like, we would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm not exaggerating, because we had a whole group of producers who would help us source footage, but as a creative, you're the one working with the creator, you need to know what you want to do, because it was a crazy social experiment. Like, we had no idea what we were going to make. If you knew what you were going to make, I think it's easy to look for things, but when you don't know what you're going to make, but you're still tasked to make something, get it approved today and put it back on the platform, it's the craziest thing to do, and with all the amount of people and layers. But I think looking back, it's probably one of the best experiences of my career, because it did really help all of us understand how do you move with that speed and how do you really make things, which was very interesting, yeah.
Wow, and a lot of coffee and good support.
I mean, every 10 minutes, yeah.
Do we have time for questions?
Yes, so we are going to take 2 questions just to stay on track. All right. Ooh, there's a mic going around. There we go.
Hi. Thank you guys so much for this. Lindsay, I know you mentioned cultural appropriation, so I was wondering, what are the steps you take to make sure that you're avoiding that and, not making content that's performative?
I mean, again, I think it goes back with intention. What is the purpose of it? What impact are you trying to have? There was a time when I thought, okay, you need, brands need to post every day, creators need to post every day. But again, like when you think about what am I trying to accomplish? What impact do I want to have? I think it's okay to take a step back. And also, if you're just focusing on jumping on trends and hijacking, there's just more room for, obviously there's more room for error, there's more room for offending, communities and people. There's more room for not interpreting the trend correctly, not giving credit to the originator. There's just all these things that can happen. So what is the purpose? Why do you need to jump on this trend? And do you understand it? And if you don't have an answer, then I'm just like, just let it go.
Question?
Yeah, to tag right along with what you're saying, I feel like it's very easy for clients to want to be comfortable, but at the same time, like, this is a big risk to jump on or to hop into a community that is culturally sound. How do you convince a client or a brand to be authentic in that community, but also still have their taste and also mitigate risk in the process?
I mean, I'm a big fan of building with. Again, when you find the communities, find the people who make it up. Find the culture drivers and the builders and the architects of it. Find the tastemakers, the creators. Have conversations, build with them. I've done a number of cultural impact summits, which are influencer marketing from the inside out of a brand. If a brand is like, I want to do a pride campaign, well, it's like, what have you done before? Each letter represents a different community, So I like your ambition, but let's have it a cultural impact summit. Let's bring them to the table without decks, and like, let's have a conversation. And then build with them. That's kind of like my favorite way to do it.
Well, one thing I wanted to add back to what you said of measures of success is having conversations with clients and aligning early on about what success actually looks like. It's not going to look like an increase of comments to your Instagram page. The measure of success might be less obvious. It might be through word of mouth. It might be, it's not fastest time to check out on a website. It's time spent people exploring the stories on, on a certain digital experience. So I think having upfront conversations with clients about measures of success and KPIs, and also being creative with those KPIs, helps to build the trust for them to want to cede control to the
A lot of
communities.
internal education, a lot of it.
Yeah, I was going to add, your clients really, you have to establish trust with your clients. I think it is a long partnership sometimes, and exposure, right? Because they don't really understand sometimes, and it will really help educate them what's happening. Sometimes it just takes time, but I think once you warm your clients up as and being very honest about what they're getting out of it, if not now, I think it only keeps getting better and better. Yeah. So that's the main thing that's happening in agency world now is you getting a project to execute something with the clients versus you having a client as your agency of record, or two different things, right? For instance, if it's agency of record, you have built enough trust over the span of time, it's much easier to execute these ideas, versus if it's just a project, it just takes much more rest because they're not used to that rest.
Don't just look at it as checking a box. I would say a big portion of my career has been internal education in order to,
Great question.
Brilliant. Well, thank you guys so much. Give it up for Cara, Lindsay, and Raj. And a huge thank you to Team One for their support as a One Club member. All right, well, this is the end of the episode. Thank you guys so much for coming out. It was a good one. We have 3 more episodes for you this week, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, same time, same place. We have a fun morning buzz mirror in the back. Take some photos, tag us. And if you're interested in membership here, I know some of you guys are new, come chat with me after the show. All right, see you tomorrow and whenever else you guys come around. Bye, guys.